Hey everyone, hope you all had a good weekend. Today we're going to do another Photoshop demo. Today we're going to focus on masks and and some different selection techniques. And as you can see here, we have a series of layers and kind of the final product of what we'll be producing today. And in the end, I'd like you to see you then apply this just as we've done in previous demonstrations. Apply it to your own photograph, whether it's a portrait of you or a portrait of a friend or maybe even a pet. I've seen them all, and they all turn out really great. And it's a technique that allows you to be creative, allows you to be expressive. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with. What we're doing today is creating a double exposure where one photograph is exposed over another and then blended together using various Photoshop tools. And this is a popular technique. It first originated in darkroom photography, where you took two pieces of film and exposed them over each other. Photoshop makes this technique much more easier to do digitally, and you can actually you actually have much more control. And so what I'd like to do is just first, as you can see, show you kind of the final product of what we're doing, but I want to go over some new refined selection techniques, and then also go over a thing called masks, which is another element we'll be using in our layers palette. So without further ado, I'm going to close this. No, I do not need to save it. We're going to log on to the server. So if you haven't already, you can click Go, Connect to Server. It'll bring up this. You'll want to go to our class, IDM Fall 20. And then under the demos files, you'll need to click on the double exposure folder and drag it to the desktop. Once that's copied over, go ahead and close the server, and we can open this up, see what's in here. So we have a collection of images, a couple of some random female models, and then we have a collection of environments. Here's our man, our third model, but a collection of textures, environments, whether it's a night sky or scenes of nature. And what I've done here is I've just given you this collection so that you can choose whichever one you want. If you're having a hard time finding a background or a secondary image for your customized version for after this demonstration. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we're going to open up the first image in Photoshop, and if you remember, we just click and drag over the Photoshop icon, and here we have our first image. And the reason why I chose this image was because of the hair. The first thing we need to do in a double exposed image is to single out our subject, the person or the thing we've taken a photograph of. And this is often easier said than done because of complicated areas like this woman's hair. So if I were to just kind of go in here, I'm going to choose my quick selection tool. If I were to just go in here and select the woman, and I'm just kind of painting a selection over her with the quick selection tool, and I were to copy this and paste it, this is what it would look like. So as you can see, I'm still seeing background. I'm still seeing the background through her hair, and that makes for a sloppy selection. So what I want to show you today is how to make a precise, refined selection, and you can deal with all of this rather intricately. And same thing goes for her dress down here. You can see, it didn't quite grab. It didn't quite grab all of the dress. So we can fix that. So I'm going to hit undo, undo. So the first thing is, I guess I'm going to go over a couple of these selection tools. We've already used some of them, but we're going to focus heavily on the quick selection tool. And as you just saw, it's a brush-based selection tool. So when I hover my mouse over the screen, you see that I get the brush circle there, and I can change the size of this brush by just clicking on my brush size drop down menu here. I can change the hardness. So this is the hardness of the selection is actually the more powerful piece of this tool. So I can actually select transparencies almost, and it's a hard thing to explain, but we'll show you here in a minute. So what I want to do is I want to set my brush to relatively large, and I'm just going to paint over the subject, and I'm going to grab as much of it as I can without going too far out of the lines. And down here, if you zoom in, you notice that I didn't quite get the dress there, so I can make single clicks right on the edge of her back there to gather all that missing information. All right, so from here I have a rough selection, and again, if I copy and paste this, it's just going to give us that kind of sloppy, real rough cutout of her. But what we want is to grab only her, none of the background. So now I'm going to go to select and mask up top, and it puts me into a new window. You'll notice my my tools have changed, and so it's brought me into the select and mask section of the program, and it gives me a couple of new tools here. What I want is the refined edge brush tool, and I can make this bigger or larger just like any other brush. And what I'm going to do is I can bring my hardness down to maybe 75. I can paint over these really hard to select areas. Anywhere you see some of the background coming through, okay, is where I'm going to paint. And you can let go of your mouse and reapply it as you paint. And you'll notice there's kind of like this subtle difference. There's like letting a little more or blocking out more of the background and letting more of the hair come through. And I'm going to do it over here. And what this refined edge brush tool does is it just finds, it's a smart tool. It just finds the pixels that are more finite and brings those forward, and then what isn't, it causes to disappear. So what I'm going to do now is I've gotten all the soft areas around her hair. I'm going to come over here, and under output settings, your output settings might be closed, so you'll have to click this little arrow, open it up, and say output to new layer with new layer mask, and hit OK. And what that does is it brings us back to our original window, and we can see all the transparent areas now in this woman's hair. Those areas that were once just blocky and roughly cut out are now gone. I can turn this layer off. This is what it outputted, the new layer and the new layer mask. And then this was our original image here. So we can see the difference. So we see the transparent checkers through those areas, and we know that that all of the background is gone, even in those hard to select areas. And it's also created this little thumbnail, which is called a mask. And to illustrate a mask, to kind of show you what a mask is, I mean, we all are more acquainted with actual masks than we ever have been before, right, with COVID. So we know that a mask covers up certain parts of our face, right? and then it lets through other parts. So if we think of like a theatrical mask, when we put that on our face, we only see, say, like the eyes, because that's what's cut out, right? So a mask in Photoshop works similarly. Okay, it's like a layer that only lets through certain information. So let's do this. I'm going to create a new layer, and you don't have to do this. I'm just doing this to show you how masks work. And on this new layer, I'm going to fill with a red color. And then if I come down here, this little tool says add layer mask. I'm going to add a layer mask, and it adds the mask here. Right now, nothing is being hidden behind this mask. Okay. The way to hide something behind a mask is to apply the color black to it. So I'm going to grab my paintbrush, and by default my colors turn black and white. And when I paint black, I don't see the color black. It just pokes a hole in my mask. Okay? And so if I wanted to create a custom mask, this is one way I can do it. But what I've just done, you'll notice that black shows up in this thumbnail. Anywhere I've painted, you see the black here in this thumbnail representing the transparent areas. Okay, so again, think of this as like a mask on your face. Wherever you've cut eyes out, that's what you can see through. You can see what is behind that mask. And so that's kind of a mask in its most basic form. If you want to then cover something back up, you need only to switch your color to white. You can do that just by clicking this arrow icon to put white on the top. And when you paint white, you're actually applying that mask. You're like repairing it. You're putting it back, right? And you see it reflect itself in this little thumbnail here. And so the advantage to this, like, okay, why can't I just use the erase tool, right? So let me get rid of this layer so we can. So why can't we, like, what's wrong with just taking the erase tool and just simply deleting the information? Well, you can. And you can do that with that really refined edge selection tool we used for the hair, right? However, the advantage to a mask is that you can actually, if I duplicate this layer, you can delete the mask and still have the original image. You still have that background to work with. If you ever need to go back or bring more of the photo into the rest of the image, you still have that information. Whereas if you're erasing with the erase tool, once you erase this background, it's gone forever. It's like permanent damage. Whereas a mask allows you to overlay or hide something without actually deleting it. All right. So that's how we select hard to select areas, and that again was with the quick selection tool, and then by clicking on select and mask, we were able to kind of paint in those hard to select areas, and we get our fresh layer mask. So I'm going to close that. You don't need to save that. Let's go back to our double exposure files, and let's open up the man. I'm going to click and drag him in here. And so we're going to do this again. Repetition is oftentimes the best teacher when it comes to these programs. So I'm grabbing my quick selection tool. I'm painting inside of this man, making sure I'm grabbing all of his features. And again, single clicks work really well. sometimes you may find that you'll need to adjust the size of the brush, in which case I do with this nose. I made it smaller so I could get in there. And just making sure I click everything. I have all of those pieces in there. And then from here, I'm going to go to Select and Mask. Once again, grab my Refine Edge brush tool. And I'm going to paint around his head. And it's very subtle. You don't quite notice what's going on. But as long as you paint around there, you'll notice it in the long run. I'm going to paint into his beard slightly. Get in all that detail. And I think that's good. So I'm going to go to Output Settings. I'm going to choose New Layer with Layer Mask. Hit OK. And there we have it. We have, some nice selection around the soft areas of his hair, and in pretty good shape. So the next part we're going to do is going to open up this folder again, and I'm going to grab the trees layer. I'm going to click and drag it inside of my artboard here. I'm going to hit enter. And if you remember, if we have this little symbol, this little paper icon on a layer, that means it's not rasterized. So we need to right click and choose rasterize layer. If you don't do that, it'll limit you as to how much you can edit that photo. So same deal here. We want to select out a lot of these trees, and this is a little trickier because these edges tend to be even more refined than the hair. We have these trees in the background, but they kind of get lost as the deeper into the mist they go. So let's give this a shot. I'm going to grab my quick selection tool. I'm going to start selecting the easy stuff. The nice thing about this selection tool is you can click and then re-click, but I'm going to be a little more careful as I get up into these areas of the tree, because I don't want to select more than what's there. And like in here, that's what I don't want. So if I want to get rid of some selection, I can hold down Option, and you'll notice my brush turns to a minus symbol, and I can select away certain parts, and then I let go of Option, and I can then begin to add again. So I'm just going to paint up into these trees, and where it tries to collect in between the trees, I'm going to just bring that back down. And some of this you're just going to have to fight with a little bit. So again, I'm holding down Option to delete the selection, and then releasing Option to add to the selection. And we're getting rough selections here now, and we can refine it as we go in to our Refine Edge tool. So let's try that. Now we can go to Select and Mask, and I've got my Refine Edge brush, and I'm just going to paint along the edges of these trees. And I'm going to hope this works, because it doesn't look like it. There we go. We can kind of see it better once it's over the guy's head. So I've just roughly brushed in along those edges. And I'm going to choose New Layer and Layer Mask and hit OK. And that's not bad. It's not bad. So what I want to do is I want to flip this over. So I'm going to go to Edit, Free Transform, or Command T. And I'm going to hover over one of the corners and rotate it. I'm going to bring this down right about here, and I'm going to scale it so it kind of fits along the height of his portrait. So there we go. So now we're getting somewhere, right? But we do have this rough, this harsh edge to deal with, and this is where we can now go in and continue to customize our mask. And right here is the mask for the trees. So I'm going to grab my paintbrush, and I'm actually going to keep it white, and I'm going to make sure my brush is at 0 hardness. And by painting it, oh no, sorry, I want it black. By painting it black, I can then kind of fuzz the edge, that harsh edge out. And I'm actually going to paint his ear out. And what that's going to do, if I just stay along the edge of his ear, is make it look like these trees are kind of tucked behind his ear. And I had to readjust the size of my paintbrush for that. And then I can make it a little bigger again as I come down here, just for a softer edge. So we have that. Something like that. And then I can come up here and kind of soften this top edge out too. Like that. Maybe a little more around the ear. It's still kind of dark. Right? Okay. Alright. So this is looking kind of cool. I do want to get rid of the guy, the back of this guy. So in order to do that, I need to actually affect his mask, which is down here. So making sure that your mask is selected, because it won't work if the image is selected. If I try to paint black now, it's just going to paint whatever color I had on there last onto the mask, onto the image. So you want to make sure you do actually, in fact, click the mask, and you know that because of the 4 corners being highlighted there. So I want to get rid of his back, so I only see trees coming out the back there. So I'm going to keep my my color black. Grab my paintbrush, and I can make my brush much bigger for this. And I'm just going to paint it out. So now it looks like it's a little more, the transition is a little smoother. Okay. So this is looking pretty good, but now we want to do a little color correction. I think the first thing will help is if we add a background layer. So I'm going to just say new layer, this little new layer button next to the trash can. I'm going to drag it to the bottom, and I'm going to choose a white background for now. Make sure your color is in the top left swatch. And if you don't have white present, you can just click the swatch and it'll bring up the color picker, and then you can choose white from there. And I'm going to grab my paint bucket. If you don't see the paint bucket, you may have to click on the gradient, or the click and hold to see the different tools in your toolbox. You may be seeing the gradient tool, but it's the paint bucket you want for this particular one. Now I'm just going to make sure my layer is selected, and I'm going to select, I'm just going to click, and it's going to fill that whole layer with the color of the paint bucket. Okay. Now what I'd like to do is just kind of add a bit of a green tint to this guy. And there are a couple of different ways of doing this, but we're going to explore this one way. So the first thing I have to do is I have to click on the layer itself. Again, not confusing it with the layer mask, but the man himself. And then I'm going to go to Adjustments, Hue and Saturation, and we end up with this window. And we have 3 sliders to deal with. We have the hue, we have the saturation, and the lightness. So the hue is the color what color are we going to change the sky? The saturation is going to be how hot that color is, how saturated it is. And then the lightness will be how light or dark that color will be. So I'm going to kind of just move over here and back and forth so you can see exactly what is happening, kind of at an extreme level. And what I'd like to do is kind of move it into like the 40s to where he ends up turning kind of green. And then I'm going to pull back on the saturation, right? And you can do this for any layer. The hue and saturation, the adjustment can be applied to any layer you wish, for any project you're working on. But I'm just showing you this just so you can see what this effect can do. So you can see how we can make it completely dark, or we can make it completely light. But that's what the lightness does. The saturation, it kind of sucks the color out to where we can go completely black and white, or we can just have that subtle bit there, or we can go super hot to where he's almost glowing. I think we're gonna stick with something down here in the 50s. That's good. And then I'd like to grab my trees layer and do a similar adjustment, hue and saturation. But I don't think I need to change the color so much as just pull the saturation down. Something like that. Hit OK. There we go. Now we can add a few more things to kind of correct this color. And that is to add an overlay and a vignette. And we do that again just by creating a new layer. And this time I'm going to grab my color picker, which is found where? Right here. The color picker is here. They moved it on me. Or the eyedropper tool, I should say. But it works much like the color picker in the sense that when you select it, whatever you click on will apply the color to your swatch. So you'll notice my color picker over here is going crazy. It's because I'm holding down, and whatever I'm rolling over with my mouse, that's the color it's sampling. So I want to try to find like a light sage green, maybe a drab kind of color, something like that. Starting to get picky. Okay, and then I can grab my paint bucket tool again and flood that layer with that color. Now I can bring the opacity down, right? But I can also change my color mode so that it affects, you'll see in the most extreme example. So this is a solid, this is 100%. And you can kind of see how it comes through with the different color modes. So what you'll need to do is just choose the color mode that you like the most. And you can see how the color helps unify the two images so that they're kind of falling under the same spectrum of color. We've already kind of done that a little bit with the hue and saturation. But now that we have this overlay, we're giving it that much more color to have in common. So let's see. Overlay's pretty good. I'm going to stick with overlay. You choose what you think looks good. I'm also going to, kind of bring it down in opacity so that's not so overpowering. Okay. So there we have that. And now I'm just going to take this layer and I'm going to click and drag it over the new layer button. And what that does is it duplicates it. And I'm going to turn the mode back to normal. And I'm going to change my opacity to 100%. And then I'm going to go to the elliptical marquee tool. I'm clicking and holding on that tool, and I can find it in that drawer. And before I do anything with it, I want to change the feather. I'm going to change the feather to about 100 and hit enter. Then I'm going to click in the very top corner and drag to the bottom corner, right? So I have an oval that's pretty much filling the whole space. Now I can hit delete, and you'll notice it kind of creates this fuzzy hole in it all. And you know, on second thought, I don't really like that. So I'm going to deselect that, and I'm going to change my feather to 400, and I'm going to do it again. So I think with a larger radius of a feather, delete, we have a larger blur happening, so it's not so hard. All right, I can hit Command D to deselect, and I can even change the blending mode of that. You know, maybe find one that you guys like that fits your piece. Well, that one's kind of nice. That's hard light. Difference, that's cool too. Difference is it takes the opposite tone. So the blue there kind of complements his shirt. I kind of like that. Or what did I say? Hard light? Yeah. So between hard light and difference, I think I'll stick with difference. And then from there you can also adjust how much that color comes through. And what you end up with is this really kind of this portrait that's really, it's got an element of meaning to it. That, you know, the color tones are calming. You know, they kind of reflect the mood of the nature. You know, the trees that's coming out, and it kind of forces you to think about the kind of person this is. You know, it's just setting the tone, the mood for, you know, who this guy is. I'm not doing a very good job of explaining this, but you can see how it adds a bit of drama to it all. So what I'd like you guys to do is to go through this process. And I've done a poor job of labeling my layers, but you guys can certainly do that through yours. Yeah, so I want you to take a picture, whether it's you or a friend, or as I said, a pet, and make sure you take one with a blank background, because that's going to make it much easier for you to select out the subject. Even with the Refine Edge tool, a blank background does a lot for you and just making this process easier. So try that. The profile, you know, taking a picture of the side of someone's face, their profile, works really well too. So that's something to consider, especially with a pet. Seeing the dog or the cat or the parakeet, whatever it is you have, seeing the profile of your subject works a lot better for this as well. So those are some tips I'll give you for your part in this. But yeah, let me see. You know, save this project to your class folder. So save, and then also the other project I would like to see saved in the homeworks folder. So hopefully that all makes sense to you guys. I am here for you if you have any questions. Thanks for those of you who've already reached out. As you know, I'm always willing to zoom in if you have any questions, on screen questions. I'm more than willing and ready to jump right in as you're working on your project or whatever I can do to help. I just want you to know that I'm here and willing. All right, so I will see you guys in the next video.